gives a detail about a special kind of woman. And it ends with these words. It says, "Many daughters have done well, but you excel. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the fruit of her hand, and let her own works praise her in the gates." You know, as we reflect on International Women's Day, this scripture describes what you would call a multifaceted woman. And we know that traditionally there have been misconceptions, in particular by men, as to who women are. And that has led to women being considered more possessions than partners. But over time, we've seen that change, and we have seen recognition and a reconciliation of the woman as a partner in purpose. Women are equal in talents and gifts and abilities, uniquely different by design. And together, the scripture reminds us that we need to appreciate women in our lives, the women in this place, and celebrate them and make sure that they are elevated to their rightful position as partners. And this Monday, I had an opportunity to reflect on important women in my life. And I remember my mother. I remember her being a housewife for many years, and then in the later part of her years, she went back to work due to some circumstances and struggled and labored that I could get to college. And then I reflected on my own wife, who left a career in the insurance industry. At that time, she was better compensated than I was, had a company car and all of these things. But she saw the purpose and the direction that we needed to go in, and made the adjustment, and she decided to leave career to focus on family. But by the same token, she developed another career that was more compatible with the advantage of the family, and we ended up better than before. And I just thank God that we have intelligent, beautiful, strong women in our and in our country. That is so important for us to recognize, appreciate, and make sure that they are elevated to their God-given position. So today I want to encourage us all here, all the men in here, to celebrate the women of this chamber, the women of our country, and remember to follow the admonition of the Bible and recognize and appreciate our women. Amen? Let's bow our heads together. Father God, we just thank you once again for another day. Thank you that we have health, strength, we have sound mind, and we are able to deliberate once again. And Father, we use this day to remind ourselves that you created us equal but different, and that we should celebrate the women in our lives, elevate the women in our lives, and make sure that they are given the honor that you designed for them. And so as we proceed today, we just thank you for your wisdom, your guidance, your direction as we proceed. And may everything we do and say be done to your glory and also for the advancement of our people. In Jesus' name, amen. Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, set us against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning, honorable members. Honorable members, when the business of this House suspended on yesterday evening, the honorable member for Fort Sill had reserved the floor. The chair now recognizes the honorable member for Fort Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 1960, Surimavo Bandaranaike was elected Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. She was the world's first female Prime Minister. I ask the question, Mr. Speaker, how far have we come since 1960? In the 1949 general election, Mary Ingram's husband, Rufus Ingram, lost his seat in Crooked Island and Auckland's district. He was convinced that his loss was due to the fact that women were not allowed to vote. This made a very strong impression on Mary Ingram, and she began agitating for the right for women to vote. But she was unsuccessful as a lone woman in achieving this goal. But when she joined up with other like-minded, strong-willed, and determined women, the odds improved significantly. The focused and determined team of suffragettes did not stop until women 21 years of age and older voted for the first time on November 26, 1962. Mr. Speaker, in my view, this was the real impetus that brought the PLP to governance and set the stage for majority rule. 1949 and 1962. Mr. Speaker, how far have we come? How have we honored the sacrifices of these brave women? How have we honored and revered the gift that they made possible for all of us? Mr. Speaker, it is my privilege to once again rise in this honorable place to make my contribution to the midterm budget for the debate for the 6-month period ending 31st of December, 2020. Mr. Speaker, I do so on behalf of the wonderful people of the great constituency of Foxhill, and I consider it a blessing and an honor that God has provided me with this opportunity to serve my people. I'm humbled by it, and I undertake it as a sacred trust and duty. International Women's Day 2021. Chaplain, you spoke about women. Monday, the 8th of March, was observed as International Women's Day. I didn't speak on that day, so I want to begin my contribution to this midterm budget by paying homage to the women who paved the way for girls and women to dream, to aspire, to achieve, to perform, and to last. It was they who paved the way for Michael, for Seabreeze, Angliston, West Grand Bahama, and Bimini, and myself stand in this honorable place and represent our constituency, our people. Mr. Speaker, Dame Janet Bostwick was the first woman elected to this Honorable House of Assembly on the 10th of June, 1982. I was to win the first international major medal for a Bahamian woman in October 1982. Mary Ingram died, Mr. Speaker, on the 26th of March, 1982. So she did not live to see this first woman elected to this honorable house. Mr. Speaker, what Mary Ingram and many of the suffragists say, what would they say? What would they say about how far we have come? International Women's Day, spoken like a man, 2021. How far have we come since Golda Meir? Israel, 1969 to 1974. How far have we come since Margaret Thatcher, United Kingdom, 1979 to 1990? How far have we come since Eugenia Charles, Dominica, 1980, 1995? Mr. Speaker, the next question would be then, if we've come so far, why only so far? There are many answers to that. But what is even more important is how do we get from where we are to where women must be? This year, the UN theme is Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World, St. Anne's. I want, however, to look at International Women's Day campaign theme, because that speaks to me. And the theme says, choose to challenge. Choose to challenge. I say this to the Bahamas. Choose to challenge the status quo. Let's make a paradigm shift and change societal mores and mindsets. Let us choose to challenge tokenism. Let us embrace the urgency of now, right now. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, the same conversation will be held and will have to be had 5 years from now. Mr. Speaker, there is a song that says, 1 is the loneliest number. I would venture to say that 1 is a significant number. It is significant to the advancement of women in all spheres of life. Arguably, Shanae Miller-Weibo is the only Bahamian woman competing at a level that dominates the world. Do we have now, as we did in 2000, 6 women who could make up a 4x1 relay team to take on the world and be a contender? The short answer is, Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture, no. Is it because we have not, as a country, been intentional, focused, and targeted in our planning? We can go further in this period of International Women's Day and ask, will any political party run more than 10 women in the upcoming general election? The answer is probably no. We can discuss gender equality on radio and television talk shows. We can write about it in newspaper columns and op-eds and discuss it in a multitude of forums. Yes, of course, all of that helps, and it helps tremendously. But until we choose to challenge ourselves, to put ourselves in a position to sit around the table of decision-making and policy-making, the progress will be slow and painful. We must choose to challenge ourselves to stop calling strong girls bossy, pushy, and loud. We must choose to challenge political parties to place women in what are called, quote unquote, safe seats. We must choose to challenge the old way of thinking and appoint women as ministers of works, ministers of tourism, as ministers of agriculture and fisheries, as leaders of political parties and heads of government. Women often tell me, Mr. Speaker, that they cannot do what female parliamentarians do. They say that it is too brutal, too nasty, that it's a dirty game. Mr. Speaker, I would venture to say to those women that in sports, we have competed against people who were found guilty of using performance-enhancing drugs. The question then is, did those people make the 100 meters dirty? Did they make the 400 meters dirty? Do you have a dirty event or do you have a dirty athlete? International Women's Day 2021 asks women and girls to choose to challenge these barriers to entry. Barriers to fulfillment of dreams and barriers to being around the decision-making table. I want to encourage young girls to believe that what they dream is indeed possible. I want to say to adult women, choose to challenge yourselves to take a chance and step out from the safe and secure. Choose to be a policymaker at the highest level. Your husband is stronger than you think. He can take it. Your children are stronger than you think. They will understand and be stronger for it. Peel away the barriers that are intended to keep you out, the barriers that are intended to keep women out. Choose to challenge yourselves to raise your male children in ways that expand their horizons and boost their confidence that they can take on and excel in non-traditional roles, and that their sisters can take on and excel in non-traditional roles. Mr. Speaker, I applaud the women and the men out there who are tireless in their efforts to make this country a more equal place for both men and women. They, like Mary Ingram, might not see the complete fulfillment of their efforts, but they will know that they have made a significant contribution to creating a more equal society. Mr. Speaker, I move on to offer some congratulations to some constituents. I want to congratulate 19-year-old Daranique Minus, a secondary education major and third-year student at the University of the Bahamas. She was crowned Miss UB on Friday, the 5th of March, 2021. I want to extend congratulations to her parents who have done an excellent job in raising her, especially her father, Durant Minus, who is a resident of the Foxville constituency. I also want to extend congratulations to Sasha Butterfield of Sandlands Primary School and to Anthony Pettikin of Thelma Gibson Primary School. They are their respective school Student of the Year nominees. I extend this congratulations to their teachers and parents. I know that it could not have been easy given the challenges of COVID-19 and virtual classes. Whilst Anthony Pettikin is a student at Thelma Gibson Primary, he's also a resident in the Foxville constituency. Anthony became an author at age 10 when he wrote a video book of poems and short stories. In this video book, Anthony writes about Hurricane Dorian, COVID-19, and his experience with virtual school, as well as his passion for basketball and track and field. His book can be seen on YouTube. Anthony celebrated his 11th birthday on Sunday, so I am sending out a special birthday greeting to you, Anthony. Your mom told me that you would be watching. So happy birthday, Anthony. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to some of the work that we are doing in the Foxville constituency. The infrastructural work is ongoing. As set out in my manifesto of 2017, the pandemic has slowed things down. However, we continue to push forward with plans for additional drainage wells and maintenance of drains, installation of zebra crossings in church zones, tree trimming, and removal of derelict vehicles. At Sandlands Primary School, I am pleased to now work with the new principal, Ms. Maycock, who succeeded Ms. Esther Cartwright. Both women have demonstrated a profound love for the students and a strong respect for the traditions and the heritage of Foxville Village. I've delivered gardening kits, backyard gardening kits to the school to restart the school vegetable garden. And I expect to have the fencing of the area started shortly. A special thanks to the Ministry of Works, who will assist with tree cutting and tree trimming, and to all the other vendors who have and who will assist in getting the garden underway. A very special thank you to Principal Maycock, who is the driving force behind this. She is a principal who can move mountains. I want to say, on behalf of Principal Maycock and the administration and staff of Sandlands Primary School, a special thank you to the Minister of Education and his staff for repairing the roof of the original school building. My grandmother went there, my mother went there, I went there, and the vast majority of my family and families in Foxville went to that original school building. So thank you, Minister of Education. I know you get your bops and punches and knocks, but thank you very much. At L.W. Young Junior High School, we look forward to outfitting 2 computer labs. I was blessed to be put in touch with an organization who has agreed to give us some assistance with electronic devices, which the school is in dire need of. This organization has pledged to provide the equipment to outfit 2 labs. Each lab will be outfitted with 20 tablets, 2 laptops, and 1 projector. At Doris Johnson School, we have ordered additional laptops, which should be coming in due time. We'd also like to extend thank you to the Minister of Education and the Minister of the Civil Service for taking on the onerous task of dealing with people who have worked in the system for 10, 15, and 20 years as contract workers. These people who are coming close to the end of their work days without having been permanent and pensionable. It is the right thing to do. It is the caring thing to do. And so we look forward to this process going on. I want to say a couple words about community gardens in Foxville. St. Anne's School is an alma mater. And St. Anne's Church with Reverend Johnson has started a huge community garden from which they intend to feed the community. So I was very pleased to be able to offer backyard gardening kits to Reverend Johnson for the St. Anne's Church, St. Anne's School backyard garden. Many MPs spend resources and time cutting down overgrown lots. And of course, they grow up again and they need to be cut down once again. I was very pleased when the owner of a lot in Eastwood allowed the residents nearby to use the lot that we had cut down as a garden. It is a huge community garden that is tended by Miss Betty Brown. Thank you, Ms. Brown, in Eastwood. And from that garden comes pigeon peas, pumpkin, and a multitude of vegetables. We are also seeing the results of community gardens and house and backyard gardens from the over 100 gardening kits that we have distributed in the constituency. Mr. Speaker, it's not long for me today, but I want to touch on one of the things that we are looking forward to in Foxhill. Foxhill was listed among the areas to become a tax-free zone, and we look forward to that. Already, we have people who have started boat repair businesses, and something quite interesting, cake box business. We never realized that there were so many people baking in Foxhill. This cake box business is less than a year old and already it's in the black. I also look at some of the hairdressers in Foxhill when people were afraid to come in, especially the older people, and they found ways of getting them to come into the shop. So they have been very creative, they have been resourceful, and they have done their best to continue to make a living. Mr. Speaker, Foxhill supports this midterm budget. Foxhill understands that these are trying times, and we want to say to our people, keep the faith. Hard times don't last. Strong people do, strong countries do. The Bahamas will last, the Bahamas will succeed, the Bahamas will come out stronger and better. And to coin a phrase from my friend, the member for Golden Isles, this is the time that we can make the wealth more common as we come out of this pandemic. We're in the same boat, and so we'll get there together if we work together. Foxhill rests. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, I must say that I join you in the sentiments you express with respect to the theme for International Women's Day. Change comes from challenge. And change is never, ever easy because the beneficiaries of the status quo will naturally resist those change. So you have to become dedicated and you have to network to achieve change in any aspect of life. Just last year, we hosted a number of women right here in this Parliament in the 16-day challenge of the Zonda Club of Nassau. And actually, as a consequence of that session, which I felt was an exceptional display of the talent of our women in this nation, I expected to really see more women really stepping forward for the next general election and being nominated either in the two major parties or by some of the smaller parties or even participating as independents. But the women, as I indicated on that occasion, needs to take a corporate approach, the same corporate approach that Mary Ingram and Alte Mortimer, who happened to be my adopted mother in New Providence, who I grew up with on Meeting Street, took. That same initiative needs to be duplicated if women are to challenge for change. And we need to expose the biases, the prejudice, the stereotyping that seem to inhibit or prevent the full participation of women. There's no other way. You have to resist and challenge the status quo to bring about change. A change and challenge world is an alert world. And we've seen that in this pandemic. The pandemic has caused the world to become an alert world. Well, we walk about now with masks on our face to protect ourselves. We adopt certain protocols to challenge the way we live. We physically distance. And those, what is happening in the world today, in my estimation, is happening for a reason. It is happening because we need to challenge the way we live and business as usual. And so I endorse the Honorable Member for Fox Hill message with respect to the need for more women to step forward. It's not going to be easy. Some sacrifice might be involved, but there's never anything good without pain. If there's no pain, I remember my basketball coach would always tell us when we got real painful in our training, there's no gain without pain. No pain, no gain. So you can rely on us men and our society to work with our women to advance that cause. As many, the chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Freetown.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, House. Good morning to the wonderful people of Freetown who have elected me to come in here to represent their interests. And it's been an honor to do so. 3 and a bit years in. I think we're doing an excellent job. And I thank them for their continued support. Mr. Speaker, I reviewed the December 2020 Fiscal Strategy Report, all 56 pages of it. And while as a qualified accountant, I found it quite easy to read and digest, I know for most people who have no background in or training in reviewing reports like this, it may have been a bit much. So, Mr. Speaker, for the benefits of my Freetown constituents, let me break it down as I see it. In 2019, the economy was doing well. The government took in $2.4 billion in revenue and spent $2.6 billion. Took in 2.4, spent 2.6, leaving a deficit of $200 million, the lowest deficit in many, many years. Thank you once again, East Grand Bahama, for a job well done while you held the chair in finance. In 2020, with the effects of Dorian and the onset of the pandemic, the government's revenue went down from $2.4 billion to $2.1 billion. And the government spending increased from $2.6 billion to $2.9 billion. So revenue's down by $300 million, and at the same time, spending is up by $300 million. That has the effects of growing the annual deficit from $200 million to $800 million. Now this year comes along. The rebuilding of Abaco is underway. Far less tourists are coming to the Bahamas due to the pandemic. And the effects of all of this is that revenue decreases from 2.4 to 2.1 to 1.7 in 2021. Meanwhile, our expenditures increased from 2.6 to 2.9 to 3.0. So to summarize, this year, we're taking in 1.7 billion. We're spending 3 billion, leaving a deficit of 1.3 billion. An unprecedented deficit, the largest deficit ever, which we all agree became necessary to cope with the ravages that Hurricane Dorian and this once-in-a-century pandemic has wrought on the Bahamian people. Every country is borrowing heavily to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. The United States, for example, just completed its third stimulus, which this lap will amount to an eye-popping $1.9 trillion. All Americans making less than $80,000 will be getting a $1,400 check to help stimulate a rebound. While our Treasury doesn't have that type of borrowing capacity, the point is, governments the world over are borrowing heavily to keep their citizenry afloat. But Mr. Speaker, we all know that our $1.3 billion deficit is unsustainable. You can't keep borrowing $1.3 billion year after year and not run yourself up on rocks. So we have two choices to reduce this record deficit. Either you increase revenue, or you reduce spending, or you do a bit of both. Let us all agree that it's hard to cut spending, even in the best of times, but especially in the worst of times. The government has had to borrow hundreds of millions of dollars to keep its corporations and agencies afloat. These entities, like Bahamas Air, have been so impacted by the pandemic that without way more government support than was ever anticipated, they would have gone under. The government has also had to borrow hundreds of millions of dollars to keep civil servants employed and on the same pay, to provide food assistance, income support, unemployment benefits, small business loans. The list is substantial, and the amounts are substantial too. No government in the history of the Bahamas has done as much as this government, has spent as much as this government in such a short period to provide assistance to its people. None. And yet, the cry from Rawson Square is always for more. We want more. The taxpayer needs to give us more. With spending already at $3 billion, I can realistically say that the taxpayer has no more to give. That is the reality. We can kid ourselves that there is more, but Mr. Speaker, there is no more. Mr. Speaker, we can reduce this unsustainable $1.3 billion annual deficit by increasing revenue. While most people will say the only way to increase revenue is to increase taxes, I say no. We must, Mr. Speaker, grow back our economy. As we all know, the effects of this COVID-19 pandemic have been devastating on the Bahamian economy. The lifeblood of our economy, tourism, has been impacted beyond anything we could have ever imagined. Cruise passengers, which accounted for 5.4 million, or 75% of our record 7.2 million visitor arrivals in 2019, have totally evaporated. And now we get absolutely zero cruise passengers. 5.4 million down to zero. Wow. Stopover passengers, which accounted for 1.8 million or 25% of our record-breaking 7.2 million visitor arrivals in 2019, are a mere 10 to 12% of what they once were. Mr. Speaker, no matter what the pundits say, there is absolutely nothing that can replace tourism in the short term. I hear some people say replace tourism with agriculture. Mr. Speaker, using all of the accounting and financial background that I have, I just don't see agriculture replacing tourism anytime soon. Our tourism industry has received billions upon billions upon billions of investment employing 2 out of every 3 Bahamians, and generates at least 50% of our GDP. Given the significance of tourism, given our dependency on tourism, our recovery and the subsequent reduction of this massive $1.3 billion annual deficit is contingent on the revival of tourism. Plain and simple. Our economy will improve when tourism improves. And tourism will improve when persons feel safe to travel here. And tourism will improve when the current health situation improves in our core markets, such that they don't need to go through all of the current rigmarole of COVID testing and getting a health visa in order to travel to the Bahamas. So I encourage all Bahamians to get vaccinated as quickly as they can, especially those employed in the tourism sector. If our visitors are vaccinated and we are vaccinated, then we will be in a good position to blow open the borders and let the good times roll again. As the Prime Minister said on Sunday night, if we have low cases of COVID, as we do, and our population gets vaccinated, income and employment from tourism will bounce back to the record 2019 levels. Mr. Speaker, we are getting calls every day from Americans who have been vaccinated. Hi, I've been vaccinated. Can I come to the Bahamas without getting a PCR test? Right now, we have to say no, which is deterring some potential visitors. You must get a PCR test, because if you come to the Bahamas vaccinated but infected, then you run the risk of infecting a Bahamian who is unvaccinated and making them very sick. Mr. Speaker, I am ready to be vaccinated. I want to be vaccinated. I will get vaccinated when the chance is offered to me. Our country, the revival of our critical tourism industry, employment, incomes is dependent on tourism. And tourism, trust me, is dependent on people getting vaccinated. So please, my fellow Bahamians, get vaccinated. People in Freetown, help your country, help yourselves by getting vaccinated. Mr. Speaker, I consider it no small privilege that my portfolio as Minister of Tourism oversees this nation's most important industry. And just as it was with immense joy, we watched 2019 numbers soar to record highs. It was with immense sadness we watched in 2020 as it plummeted to record lows. But we did not give up. And I'm reminded of that scene in Rocky, when the broken, bloodied, bruised Sylvester Stallone, Rocky Balboa says, "It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." And so, Mr. Speaker, this Ministry of Tourism has and continues to plan to do just that. Keep moving forward. We have no option. Too many Bahamians are depending on us to keep moving forward. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, we really never stopped. We have seemingly been in recovery mode ever since Hurricane Dorian brought destruction to our shores in September 2019. The Bahamas Ministry of Tourism, facing what we now know was the first of 2 tremendous obstacles, immediately went to work, adapting our messaging, our marketing, our motivation. A few months later, and as the history books will show, we would celebrate the most successful year of Bahamian tourism. 7.2 million tourists. When faced with those unprecedented times, we recovered, we adapted, we moved forward. Just as my ministry successfully implemented a framework for Hurricane Dorian, so too have we put in place structures that have protected Bahamians and visitors alike. That is not to say we have made all the best moves along the way. Indeed, we have faltered. Personally, and as an organization. This was inevitable in the face of such an unprecedented setback that saw the whole world reeling. But we did not, nor have we given up. For just as the good book says, a righteous man falleth 7 times and riseth up again, but the wicked are overthrown by calamity. We have risen, we are still standing, and we will keep moving forward. Mr. Speaker, boy, you know, I looked into the scripture last night or that one. Mr. Speaker, y'all converted me, you know. Y'all got me in the good book. Mr. Speaker, 2020 was a year. 2020 was a year we will measure not by the number of arrivals to the Bahamas, but instead by the number of steps we took to safeguard our tourism product. Notwithstanding, the numbers tell the story completely, and I believe it is important that the Bahamian people understand exactly what we have been facing. According to the United Nations World Tourism Organization, in 2020, there were 1.1 billion fewer tourist arrivals globally, taking the world back to the levels of 1990. To put this another way, remember the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009? Well, this pandemic is 11 times the loss of the 2009 financial crisis. 100 to 120 million direct tourism jobs are currently at risk. Experts, however, expect to see this pandemic ease at the end of the year and for things to start to come back. A particular note is that in 2020, the Caribbean saw an overall decrease in visitor arrivals of 67%. And specifically, the Bahamas was down by 74% year on year. It is against this rather bleak backdrop that we worked assiduously to ensure that we were in a state of readiness when we reopened our tourism industry. And so, our robust approach comprised of a number of pillars: the Tourism Readiness and Recovery Plan, the Ministry of Tourism and Industry Stakeholders Clean and Pristine Designation, and the Bahamas Travel Health Visa. Each component contributed another layer of protection in our complete defense against COVID-19. The Tourism Readiness and Recovery Plan was a behemoth of an effort put together by the Tourism Readiness and Recovery Committee. As I have now communicated on a number of occasions, it comprised some 30 subcommittees and over 100 contributors from every single touch point of our tourism product. It was our most cross-cutting effort to involve as many stakeholders in the decision-making processes of health and safety planning. Through 6 tourism compliance workshops for health and safety, well over 10,000 tourism professionals were trained in COVID-19 health protocols over the course of 3 days. To date, the vast majority of the Bahamas hospitality sector, some 40,000 strong, from hotel staff to cab drivers to tour operators, have been trained and is adhering to our new streamlined health and safety protocols. The World Travel and Tourism Council's Safe Travel designation was awarded to the islands of the Bahamas in recognition for meeting enhanced health and safety standards by developing protocols through coordinated public and private sector approaches. This ministry added to travelers' confidence through obtaining a globally recognized distinction in COVID-19 preparedness. Indeed, the Bahamas Ministry of Tourism and Aviation left no stone unturned in its widespread effort to combat COVID-19 within its most prized industry. Mr. Speaker, when we set November the 1st as our reopening date, we were leaning heavily on months of preparation behind every aspect of the tourism industry. I would venture a guess that not since independence, with so many minds, so many resources, and so many sleepless nights being devoted to a singular enterprise, the safe reopening of the Bahamian tourism industry. And so we inched forward Atlantis reopened on December the 10th. Bahama and the Hilton followed shortly thereafter. Sandals, Exuma opened at the end of February. And just last week, the Rosewood and SLS have reopened. With the return of so many of our properties, we remain cautiously optimistic that our tourism sector is doing their part in ensuring our rebound. The gears of the tourism machine, for many months ground to a halt, are churning once again, albeit not on all cylinders. But the pistons are beginning to fire, and we are moving closer to returning to the glory days of Bahamian tourism. Mr. Speaker, running concurrently with our November reopening was the introduction of a new streamlined health visa platform. It should be noted that we first introduced the health visa platform in July of last year, but work continued. And in fact, still continues as we work to make it better and more efficient. We do hear the comments of the traveling public and work hard to decipher the constructive criticism and implement those changes that will help the process work faster and quicker. But I want to acknowledge the dedicated travel health visa team and all the hardworking people involved in working around the clock to create such a platform in record time. Their efforts need to be commended. Our travel health visa is something that we should collectively applaud. The Bahamas was quick to pivot to a system that would assist in the return to travel in as safe a manner as possible. In addition, everywhere I go, persons are applauding the time frame in which a visa is approved. In most instances, the turnaround time is in under 6 hours and certainly within a day. The screeners of the PCR tests, also embedded in the Ministry of Tourism and led by the indomitable Trevor Moss, have, by and large, done a fantastic job helping persons through the process and approving health visa applications in record time. When others said it could not work, they stood and watched what we were doing. And for many countries, as the pandemic surged on, they slowly started to follow suit. We were the pace setters, and we should stand proud. For the past 4 months, we have received over 125,000 travel applications from both visitors and returning residents. Since the new year, we're averaging over 2,000 every day. And each month, Mr. Speaker, the number of visitors applying for the health visa is slowly increasing. In November, our first month of reopening, there were 14,000 visitors, not returning residents, visitors who applied. In December, there were 32,000 visitors who applied. In January, there were 21,000 who applied, a decrease caused by President Biden's announcement that quarantining for persons returning to the United States from travel abroad was being contemplated, an idea that was later dismissed. In February, there were over 28,000 that applied. And for March, I estimate that close to 45,000 visitors will apply for a health visa, given that Easter falls at the end of this month and hotels are reporting healthier bookings. So as you can see, Mr. Speaker, the visitors are slowly returning. Still a far cry from the 150,000 per month we were receiving pre-COVID, but increasing every month. Mr. Speaker, I predict that visitor arrivals will progressively improve during the course of the year, culminating with a good Christmas, when hopefully all of the Bahamas and all of our core source markets like the US, Canada, and the UK will have been mostly vaccinated, and the pent-up demand for travel will have been unleashed. Mr. Speaker, I've been extremely proud of our opening. We all held our collective breath to see if the reopening of tourism would in some way contribute to an increase in the number of COVID cases. But by and large, Mr. Speaker, the number of cases have remained low. On most days, the number of positive cases is less than 5% of those tested. I'm advised by the health professionals that if 5% or less of the persons tested are positive, we have a handle on things. And on most days, I note that there are less than 20 persons in hospital for COVID, a far cry from August and September, when the number of persons hospitalized for COVID was over 100, and we were building additional hospital beds. As a result, Mr. Speaker, the number of Bahamians dying from COVID has dropped dramatically. I'm so happy that this has happened, although any loss of life is simply one too many. I'm also proud of the Bahamian people who've embraced the health protocols and contributed to the impressive results for which we have been internationally recognized and which has led to our upgrade by the Center for Disease Control, CDC, from a level 4 to a level 3. Mr. Speaker, this upgrade is truly a feather in our cap. There are 163 countries in level 4. All of them countries with plenty COVID. And remarkably, only 19 countries in level 3. We are ranked by the CDC as being in the top 1/3, as opposed to the bottom 2/3, of countries who have a handle on this COVID pandemic. And as the Prime Minister stated in his contribution, we're looking to move up to level 2, which would place us in the top 15%. But despite these numbers, despite the 125,000 air arrivals we have seen since November, and despite the fact that the number of COVID cases brought about through tourism have been virtually non-existent, there is very sadly and regrettably a strong vocal minority of both Bahamians and foreigners alike campaigning to make you feel that the health visa is hurting our tourism product. It is definitely an impediment to travel. But let me be clear and direct. Since the onset of COVID-19, my ministry's top priority has been to navigate this crisis in a way that balances the public health and safety of all Bahamian citizens and residents, whilst also ensuring the safe reopening of our tourism sector. This has not been a straightforward process. And as I have already said, we have certainly made a few missteps along the way. The complexity of every decision relative to protocols, entry guidelines, and the health visa framework weigh heavily on me and every member of my team. At the beginning of the year, COVID-19 cases in the US and indeed around the world had reached record levels. And new, more unpredictable strains of the virus have forced many nations to rethink their opening procedures. When we made the decision to extend the existing safety measures instead of relaxing entry guidelines, we did so to prevent placing an overwhelming strain on our healthcare systems and practitioners. Quite simply, we were looking after our own and protecting our Bahamian tourism product such that we would have an industry to welcome tourists back in the future. And so we kept moving forward. As our competitor tourism nations in the Caribbean quietly implemented their own brand of health visas and testing requirements, they looked to the Bahamas for guidance. Yes, Mr. Speaker, does it come as a surprise, therefore, that the Caribbean Journal's 7th annual Caribbean Travel Awards, the Bahamas was awarded Innovative Destination of the Year for its continued flexibility throughout the pandemic and setting a standard for destination entry practices. So when you hear persons claiming that our health visa and entry protocols are too cumbersome, too overbearing, too demanding for the American traveler, ask yourself what is truly at stake. Traveling in today's world is no longer easy and simple. Those days are behind us. And while we wait for their return, we must be practical and do what is in our best interest. Our comprehensive COVID-19 response has reassured future visitors that they can and will enjoy their time in our country, and has given them the peace of mind that we value their health and safety as much as they do. In a post-COVID travel ecosystem, this is what matters. As perceptions about travel continue to shift positively in our key markets, tourism research company Destination Analysts notes that over 55% of American travelers are in a ready-to-travel state of mind. And we must remain exceedingly vigilant. Our focus remains fixated on how best to responsibly carve out our market share. Our numerous public service announcements and island-wide campaigns are designed not only to encourage Bahamians to follow health protocols, but to remain transparent with our markets and in turn, boost consumer confidence. Destination analysts say 77% of Americans feel it is important for brands to acknowledge COVID-19 in television and digital advertising. By stressing the importance of wearing masks and adhering to social distancing guidelines, we are doing just that. Indeed, this vigilance will keep us moving forward. Mr. Speaker, as of today, per the latest data, some 60 million Americans have received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, with over 31 million being fully vaccinated. Today, providers are administering some 2.1 million doses per day. While Bloomberg's vaccine tracker initially reported that it will take an estimated 8 months to cover 75% of the US population with a 2-dose vaccine, President Biden recently indicated that with the introduction of the new single-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine on the market, Americans could now expect to be fully vaccinated by the end of May, 2 months ahead of what was originally forecasted. The global vaccine rollout offers tourism destinations such as ours much hope in the months ahead. Vaccination campaigns are underway in nearly 80 countries around the world, including each of our core markets. Many travelers are postponing travel plans until themselves and others are vaccinated. And the U.S. Travel Association estimates that half plan to continue to avoid travel altogether until vaccines are widely available. With our vaccine efforts underway, an approach to normalcy is on the horizon. That is not to say that it is around the corner, but we are certainly trending in the right direction. All relevant market analysis signals that the more a country's population is vaccinated, the more appealing that destination becomes for travelers. Airlines have been quick to take note. A recent Washington Post article noted that American Airlines is betting on country-specific, vaccine-driven tourism opportunities to drive traffic. Where to? Israel, the country with the fastest vaccine rollout in the world. American Airlines is set to launch direct flights from JFK and Miami to Tel Aviv. Israel is also about to be the site of the world's busiest cruise hub, as Royal Caribbean has decided to deploy its newest vessel there in May. Notwithstanding this, we cannot sit idly by as destinations around the world carve out valuable brand positioning as tourism rebounds. Israel's rapid vaccination of nearly half of its population has allowed the government to loosen its COVID-19 restrictions sooner than other countries. It will soon benefit from a first mover advantage. And so we know that a delayed vaccine rollout will prove another costly setback, one we cannot afford. It is why the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Health are working assiduously to see the first tranche of vaccines arrive on our shores with a vaccination plan already in place. Mr. Speaker, we've endured many setbacks. Tourism is down 74% worldwide, and our 2020 numbers paled in comparison to 2019's historic figures. Recently, President Biden's quarantine comments, which have since been moved back, had rather a significant impact, but we're delighted that he moved it back. The requirement for a COVID-19 test 72 hours before re-entry to the United States at first convinced many travelers to stay home. But we were already well positioned to meet this challenge with our day 5 antigen test. While other destinations struggled to put this infrastructure in place, our infrastructure was already in place across the archipelago because of our own protocols. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report that many of our niche and high-end markets have been well positioned for months as they have adapted to tourism's so-called new normal. One hotel operator in Harbor Island and North Eleuthera, as the good member said, recently called me and said whatever we were doing as it relates to entry protocols was working for him. His hotel was totally booked through Easter as discerning travelers actively sought refuge in the Family Islands, which are ideally set up for social distancing away from the big cities and population centers. The niche markets, your diving, fishing, private aviation sectors, have actually seen a significant uptick in business. I had one high-end hotel operator here in Nassau call me recently and note that from a hotel perspective, not a food and beverage perspective, but from a hotel perspective, this past Christmas 2020 was actually busier than the Christmas in 2019. This is a hotel that caters to private yachters as well. And so we continue to be appreciative of the business that boaters continue to bring. In fact, if you go out to Prince George Dock right now, all you see is those mega cruise yachts out there taking advantage of this incredible country. In fact, it is because of this that I recently attended the Bahamas Charter Yacht Show in West Palm Beach, Florida. This two-day event was organized by the Association of Bahamas Marinas in partnership with the Ministry of Tourism and the International Yacht Brokers Association. Participating in this show were 80 of the top yacht charter brokers who book charters to the Bahamas along with yachts. As a result of attendance at this show, I can say that the Bahamas has been added to many new yacht brokers' schedules. And we have seen an increase in inquiries and charter yacht bookings to the Bahamas. In fact, one broker said that in the past, the mega yachts, the 200-foot, 300-foot, 400-foot, simply sailed by the Bahamas, heading down to the Southern Caribbean. There was a perception that our water was too shallow and therefore not ideal for such large yachts. With the onset of COVID and the insane difficulties moving between countries and territories in the Southern Caribbean, going from St. Martin to St. Bart's to Anguilla, all having different entry protocols, the Bahamas has been rediscovered as a gem for yachting. We have one set of easy to navigate entry protocols with a quick turnaround time and then access to 700 beautiful islands, so near to their starting point in South Florida, negating the need for a long flight either at the start or end of the journey. Any success that we may be experiencing, therefore, is clearly an indication of the success of the health protocols and a reflection of our clientele buying into our reopening process. Considering these niche markets' support of our family islands, those which are typically slower to rebound, this measured growth augurs favorably for Nassau's upcoming revival. Mr. Speaker, finding ourselves well positioned to respond to fluid changes in the global travel marketplace is hardly an act of serendipity. Rather, a series of coordinated, behind-the-scenes effort led chiefly by our formidable marketing strategy keeps us ahead of the curve. You may remember the media blitz after Hurricane Dorian. Everyone with a microphone and cameraman found themselves heading to Abaco to report on the damage. Those images broadcast around the world largely discounted the Bahamas as a viable destination, even though 14 of our 16 islands remained open for visitors. We swooped into action by offering relief and recovery to the affected areas and spreading the message that the country has not been impacted to the extent that the world has been led to believe. We therefore leaned in heavily on our established communication channels to tell that same message to the world. We were a little rattled, but we were still rocking. Mr. Speaker, I stress the impact of our marketing efforts because a few familiar naysayers have questioned why are we still advertising in the US? The reality is quite simple, and I will again be as clear and direct as possible. We have a small marketing campaign localized in areas in the US where we have airlift to the Bahamas. It's that simple. We have pulled advertising entirely from our European and Canadian markets, given their inability to travel overseas, and instead campaigning in earnest in South Florida. By embracing the available opportunities, while we have the bandwidth to do so, we are not only supporting those airlines which are flying into our islands on low load factors, but also reminding those Americans who are keen to travel that paradise is as close as 1 hour away. We are in the right zip codes, at the right times, to capture the right markets. It's no secret that to keep the hotels open and to keep the thousands that depend on those hotels remaining open employed, we need people to travel here. By leveraging our outreach globally, and indeed concentrating it in areas we need it most, we can take care of our tourism systems locally. We have never stopped moving forward. But why should we tap out now? Americans are traveling. Make no bones about it. We have what they are looking for: health, security, and peace of mind, a clear demonstration of health protocols, availability of niche markets, short-haul flights, and ample social distancing opportunities through the Family Islands. We must remain engaged in our primary source market. To suggest otherwise would be tantamount to disregarding every step we have taken, every inch of forward progress, every ounce of energy directed solely at preserving the Bahamian tourism product. Our competitors are already there. Jamaica, Bermuda, St. Lucia are running their own campaigns. We must remain the first choice for travelers when they decide to travel. Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss were I not to mention the work Team Tourism has done behind the digital curtain to maintain an outstanding digital presence in the tourism marketplace. Adjusting to the new normal was certainly a great conundrum for this ministry to unravel, but we have done so with the efficiency and professionalism our stakeholders have come to expect. Our tagline has always been, it's better in the Bahamas, but it's only better when the visitors can experience for themselves the best hospitality the world has to offer. And so we've given them our very best virtual offerings. We've become experts at webinars and virtual events, helping our sales agents host discussions such as safety precautions and island experiences and hotel updates digitally. By partnering with airlines, tour operators, and other key Bahamas stakeholders, we've been able to get both consumers and trade partners engaged. So far, global sales have reached some 20,000 agents, planners, and consumers, all digitally. Virtual consumer trade shows allowed the Bahamas to remain highly visible and promote increased stakeholder engagement at key events such as the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show, the AAA Travel Show, and the World Travel Market. These shows allowed us to not only grow our databases, but to create more personalized opportunities through one-on-one meetings with clients. In some cases, we were the only destination there. Thanks to strengthened relationships with many of our key airline and tour operator partners, the Bahamas has been able to successfully support the future resumption of routes, as well as maintain dialogue for the opening of future routes. Our strategic airline partners, American Airlines, Delta, JetBlue, and Air Canada, all partnered with the Bahamas through webinars focused on safety awareness, which helps consumers see for themselves the awe-inspiring beauty of our island. Last but certainly not least, the Bahamas experimented with a variety of new mediums to best align ourselves with the mass industry and to pivot to digital events. In November of last year, we held the first ever virtual diving pavilion, allowing us to virtually showcase 9 of the country's leading dive operators. The feedback from the industry was overwhelmingly positive, with some 450 booth chats and nearly 100 shares of our digital brochure. In addition, just last week, the Bahamas Virtual Romance Expo, titled The Bahamas with Love, was developed in response to a market, wedding and honeymoons, etc., that was seemingly on life support, but still resilient, still planning and celebrating memorable moments in the face of a pandemic. COVID-19 created challenges across the board, but as with everything, we needed to modify the way we do business to meet the moment. And so even in the romance sector, even the romance sector carried on with truncated versions of elaborate gatherings, parties, and celebrations called micro-weddings. Instead of 200 guests, weddings were being pared down to 20 to 30 guests. Mr. Speaker, there are but a few examples of tourism's dynamic presence in the ever-expanding digital marketplace. We have sowed our seeds thoroughly and carefully, such that when the time is right, we may reap a bountiful harvest. A solid reputation will put us in good stead as we continue to move forward in the coming months. As we continue to update and revise our own methods to controlling COVID-19, we must understand that we cannot take a zero-sum approach to our ongoing reopening. The ministry is but one component of a complex network of actors working to balance economic growth, tourism numbers, and COVID-19 cases. We remain in constant communication with private companies, government officials, and ordinary Bahamians to learn fresh perspectives on how best we keep moving forward. We cannot move forward as a country if we are continually in the recovery phase. And we cannot move forward as a people if we do not prepare for whatever uncertain times lay ahead. Through this very challenging year, I've been honored by the work of the professionals at the Ministry of Tourism and Aviation. This is my important general right here, keeping me in check. They show up, sometimes even in the most challenging situations, like the air conditioning ain't working, and continuously never giving up, even when the going gets tough. And so to all of them, I say thank you. We are all indebted to you. I also wish to say a public thank you to Permanent Secretary Charles Aubrey, who recently retired as the Permanent Secretary in my ministry. P.S. Aubrey was a consummate professional. He was hardworking, calm in the face of any storm, and even-keeled at all times. He also ensured in the nicest possible way that I knew my parameters. He will be missed, and I speak on behalf of my ministry when I wish him every success moving forward. Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge that COVID-19 has presented this Ministry of Tourism and Aviation with a fresh set of challenges to be met and obstacles to overcome. Progress thus far has been measured, though reassuring, and our expectations are tempered for the year ahead. But so long as we're in the ring, still taking the punches, we'll keep moving forward. Mr. Speaker, before moving on to developments in aviation, I just wanted to update the Bahamian people on the recent developments in the cruise industry and the Nassau Cruise Port project. Mr. Speaker, one of the greatest accomplishments of this Hubert Minnis-led administration is that Nassau Cruise Port project. In late 2019, the government of the Bahamas entered into a public-private partnership with Nassau Cruise Port Limited. Nassau Cruise Port would invest $250 million into redeveloping the port, and in return, it would gain a concession to operate the port for 25 years. In May 2020, despite the onset of the pandemic and despite the complete shutdown of the cruise industry, Nassau Cruise Port Limited was able to raise $130 million of Bahamian money to carry it through its redevelopment thus far. This clearly demonstrates the confidence the Bahamians have in this project, and I'm advised that there is keen interest to provide the additional funding it will take to complete the project by mid-2022. Nassau Cruise Port will have majority Bahamian ownership, and all of its management and employees have been Bahamian from day one. Mr. Speaker, there was no need to hire non-Bahamians to run this company. Suitable, qualified, highly skilled, and trained port operators existed in the Bahamas. And so I'm delighted to report that all 20 persons employed by Nassau Cruise Port Limited are Bahamian. As everyone can see, the redevelopment of the Prince George Dock is very much underway. To date, over $50 million has been spent on construction, and right now, over 2,000 feet of new piers is currently under construction. Despite the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, the order book for new cruise ships remains intact, with no cancellations being received thus far. And over 100 new cruise ships are expected to be launched by 2027. In 2019, the first Oasis-class cruise ship was launched, representing a new era of mega 6,000-plus passenger cruise vessels. The deployment of these new mega ships requires their marriage to mega berths. So the Nassau Cruise Port redevelopment offers the industry 6 cruise berths, 3 of which will now be able to receive the largest ships in the world. In addition, Mr. Speaker, with almost 50 Bahamian companies engaged in this project thus far. I expect hundreds of jobs for Bahamians during the construction phase of the project, especially during the construction of the project, especially when the building and landscaping components of the project gets underway. In addition, notwithstanding the festival tenants, the port is currently receiving retail concepts and food and beverage concepts from Bahamian companies only. Prior to the pandemic, Nassau Cruise Port received just over 3.6 million passengers annually, or 10,000 persons every day of the year, making it one of the busiest transit cruise ports in the world. Cruise executives advise that they expect the CDC to have completed their review of the protocols to resume cruises by the latter part of this year, at the very latest. Mr. Speaker, the cruise companies are itching to go, but the CDC is presently consumed with the vaccine rollout, which should essentially be done by June, July of this year, allowing them to bring focus to the cruise industry. Mr. Speaker, the new cruise port development in Nassau is creating keen interest by the cruise company. For example, Mr. Speaker, in the last 6 months of 2019, our busiest year, the last 6 months of 2019, 682 cruise ships called into the port of Nassau, 682. For the last 6 months of 2021, this year, the Nassau Cruise Port has received 810 berth requests, an increase of 128 ships, or a whopping 20% over 2019, which was a record year. So let us assume, Mr. Speaker, 2021 does not materialize. Let us look into 2022. In 2019, the busiest year, the cruise port received 1,183 cruise ships. Right now, Mr. Speaker, on the books, there are 1,284 berth requests for 2022, which represents 101 more ships than called in 2019, an increase of almost 9%. So don't mind what the naysayers saying. This project is quickly developing into a home run for the Bahamian people and the Bahamas. And let us not forget that under the former administration, the port was so run down that the government actually paid the cruise companies millions upon millions of dollars in incentives annually to come to Nassau. Mr. Speaker, can you believe it? They took over $10 million of scarce taxpayer money every year, sometimes as much as $15 million a year, and gave it to the cruise company, begging them to come to Nassau by throwing my money and your money we all work hard to pay in taxes, by throwing that money at them in incentives. Mr. Speaker, sometimes we undersell ourselves. Clearly, as it relates to the port of Nassau, the former government did just that. We have a country that is ideally set up for cruise companies. Its proximity to the 3 busiest cruise ports in the world, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Canaveral, make it a highly desirable destination. We don't have to pay no cruise company to come here. They all want to be here. They all want to come here. That is why they all spent hundreds of millions of dollars to develop their private islands and are actively looking for more venues to set up shop. We just have to make sure that these private island projects are tied into our population centers, Nassau and Freeport. You want to go to your private island where you own everything and operate everything? Fine. But you remember, coming to Nassau and Freeport is where you provide the most opportunities for our people. So make sure you factor that into your plans. And oh, by the way, help our Bahamian entrepreneurs to create venues and excursions in these destinations that will impact as many Bahamians as possible and encourage cruise passengers to spend more money in the destination. I saw Carnival's comments in the paper. The port will not make the destination, the excursion will. I don't disagree. But when I came to office, all cruise lines, including Carnival, complained bitterly about the state of the port and wanted the Bahamian taxpayer, despite the money the PLP government was paying them in incentives, to pay for its upgrade entirely. Now that we are doing the upgrade, for which the cruise passengers will pay for through user fees, just like the airport, where the users of the airport are paying for that beautiful redevelopment, we now have a common purpose to make the destination even more desirable by developing interesting and creative excursions for their cruise passengers to enjoy. Mr. Speaker, this F&M government has created and given life to the Tourism Development Corporation, headed up by long-term tourism executive Janet Johnson. Its sole purpose is to deepen linkages between the tourism industry and the domestic economy. We need tourists to spend more money when they come to the Bahamas. We need local businesses to sell more Bahamian-made products, to buy more Bahamian-made products, so that more Bahamians feel in their pocketbook all of these tourists the Ministry of Tourism have been successful in bringing to the Bahamas. And with Key West banning all large cruise ships and Cayman considering exiting the cruise business, our attractiveness as an environmentally conscious, business-friendly destination just makes the Bahamas, and by extension, the newly renovated port of Nassau, that much more desirable. And everyone understands that. All the stakeholders engaged in the cruise industry are excited about this project. Improved working conditions when the port is done, more customers when the port is completed. Who would not be supportive? Mr. Speaker, I invite you to walk out to the Prince George dock. The project is continuing despite the pandemic, supported by Bahamian investors. No government money needed or requested. Managed by qualified Bahamian personnel, creating both construction and business opportunities for a myriad of Bahamian companies, all of which is being noticed by the cruise companies and leading to an increase in the demand for berths, which will ultimately positively impact every Bahamian business on Bay Street and every Bahamian business involved in the excursion business. Mr. Speaker, quote Rodney Moncoeur, this is powerful. And let us not forget that the cruise passengers will now be paying $8.50 plus VAT to come to our new port. Whereas under the former government, the cruise passengers only paid 70 cents to get off the ship. 70 cents, $8.50 plus VAT, that's $1.02. So that's $9.52 versus 70 cents. Mr. Speaker, I also have another interesting development to report about the port. Cruise companies are approaching us about the possibility of home porting in Nassau. Mr. Speaker, 3 companies have approached us about starting and ending their cruises right out there at Prince George Dock. And they want to start ASAP, as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, the economic implications of this development are significant. Cruise passengers would fly into Nassau, naturally complying with our current health protocols, either spend a couple of nights at a local hotel here in Nassau or just proceed directly from the airport to the cruise port to board their cruise. Then they move about the Bahamas, Freeport, or their private island, or other islands in the Bahamas, and then return to Nassau, where they can decide to extend their stay at one of our many hotels or proceed directly back to the United States via LPIA. Mr. Speaker, this is new. An extremely exciting development that the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Health, the Nassau Cruise Port, NAD, are all working together diligently to see if we can pull it off. Persons who start and end their cruise in a particular destination end up spending 5 times more than they typically spend in a destination where they pop in off the boat for a couple hours. So we are anxious to make this a reality. Mr. Speaker, stand by for further developments as they evolve. Once again, Mr. Speaker, this is powerful. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the aviation component of my portfolio. Mr. Speaker, the commercial aviation sector has been significantly impacted by COVID. The Airport Authority, NAD, Nassau Flight Services, and Bahamas Air all rely on user fees to generate most of their income and use their government subvention to top up any funding shortfalls. However, with the onset of COVID and the implementation of rigorous new health protocols, air travel has dramatically decreased, meaning that the fees that the Airport Authority, NAD, Nassau Flight Services, and Bahamas Air have been able to collect from air travelers have dramatically decreased also. Mr. Speaker, for this budget year, 2020 to 2021, the following government subventions were anticipated. Bahamas Air was to receive $19 million. The Airport Authority was to receive $5 million. Nassau Flight Services was to receive $1.5 million. And NAD was to receive nothing. That totaled $25.5 million. Mr. Speaker, with the decision by the taxpayer to fund these entities no matter what the cost, so far this year, up to the middle of this month, these government-owned entities will have received the following in government support. 53 million for Bahamas Air versus the 19 we budgeted for the whole year. 8 million for the airport authority. We budgeted 5 for the whole year. 4.5 for Nassau Flight Services. We budgeted 1.5 for the whole year. That totals $61.5 million as of the middle of March versus 25.5 for the whole year that we budgeted. Mr. Speaker, the level of taxpayer support for these entities is already 2.4 times greater than what was budgeted. And we still have 3.5 months to go until the end of the budget year. I estimate, Mr. Speaker, that by the end of the year, these entities will have cost the taxpayer over $75 million, which is 3 times more than what was budgeted. We budgeted 25 million, but we'll probably spend 75 million. An extra 50 million that the taxpayer has had to borrow to keep these companies afloat and everyone receiving their full pay. Mr. Speaker, as you can see, these entities are costing the taxpayer a fortune. So I respectfully ask the employees of these companies to understand and appreciate the difficulty the Treasury sometimes experiences when they're trying to fund these unbudgeted expenses. Bahamas Air, of course, is incurring the most losses. With the current health protocols in place, a PCR test is needed to travel domestically from Nassau and Freeport, and in some cases travel back, load factors are very, very low. As such, Mr. Speaker, the only way to stop the hemorrhaging of cash at the national flag carrier is to get our people vaccinated, allowing the government to remove the health protocols, and people to start traveling again. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the Family Island airports. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to report that we are well advanced in our Family Island airports redevelopment strategy. Mr. Speaker, given the success of the PPP model at the port and the success of the PPP model at NAD, the Prime Minister recently announced the Bahamas Business Outlook, the intention of the government of the Bahamas to use public-private partnerships to redevelop Family Island airports. Mr. Speaker, our Family Island airports require well over $250 million in capital improvement. New terminals, new runways, and clearly the taxpayer is challenged to fund such ambitious capital projects from its annual budget. So once again, the government is turning to private money, tapping into the many billions of Bahamian dollars sitting in local banks, making very low interest rates to assist the government in fixing up, renovating, expanding some of its critical Family Island airports. Mr. Speaker, it has taken some time to develop this strategy. The first step was to legally define all of the airports, since in many instances these airports had simply evolved. When entities invest in a project, they want to know what they're investing in. And so we have had to survey all of the relevant airports, find what land makes up that airport, and then transfer ownership of that land from the government and in some cases private owners to the airport authority, which is the vehicle the government intends to use to manage all of its airport assets. Next, we had to secure funding. We had to build the case that if you invested in our Family Island airports, contributed cash to bring about its development for the betterment of the people and economies on that island, then we will provide you with a return on your investment from the user fees that will be paid by the persons using that airport. Mr. Speaker, this is very normal. When LPIA was built, almost $500 million was borrowed to build what we have today. $500 million. And the repayment of that $500 million is to be made not from the Treasury, not from the taxpayer, although the effects of this pandemic may temporarily change that, but from the users who travel through the airport. Well, we intend to use the same plan in the Family Island. Funds are raised and repaid through passenger facility charges. Mr. Speaker, we have secured the funding to complete 4 airport projects: Exuma, Long Island, Eleuthera, and Marsh Harbor. We expect these 4 projects will cost approximately $175 million, with $32 million coming from the Inter-American Development Bank and the remaining $143 million coming from a wide array of local investors via Royal Fidelity. Mr. Speaker, the $140 million that has been secured from Royal Fidelity is a non-recourse transaction to the government of the Bahamas, i.e. the debt will be financed by the project's cash flow and will not be an obligation of the government of the Bahamas and not reflected on the balance sheet of the government of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, the Royal Fidelity will source its funding from as many investors as it can, and I've been advised that there's a high degree of interest in these Family Island airport projects. So I remain hopeful that the necessary funding will be secured to make these airports into a reality and bring to the Family Islands the investment that they need and want to make these critical needed airports a reality. Mr. Speaker, our very ambitious airport development includes the following. Listen, I get telling you now. Exuma International Airport. Exuma International Airport. This project is expected to cost approximately $65 million. $53 million will come from Royal Fidelity and $12 million from the IDB. A contract is currently being finalized for this airport with a Bahamian construction firm, and an airport management company is being sourced to manage the construction and then manage the airport once completed. Groundbreaking is imminent. The Long Island International Airport at Deadman's Key. Yeah. Yeah. The Long Island International Airport at Deadman's Key. This project is expected to cost $18 million, all of which will be provided by Royal Fidelity. This project is going out to tender within the next 14 days, and we expect to award a contract to a Bahamian construction company to build a new 18,000 square foot terminal and a 6,000 foot runway in Deadman's Key, Long Island. North Eleuthera Airport. This project is expected to cost $65 million as well. Also, since it needs a completely new runway. $47 million will come from Royal Fidelity and $18 million will come from the IDB. This project is in the final stages of planning and pending the land acquisition that I will talk about in a few minutes will go out to tender within the next 6 months. The Leonard Thompson International Airport in Marsh Harbor. This project is expected to cost approximately $10 million to improve the terminal building and to rebuild the air traffic control tower and the general services building. Other airport projects in the pipeline include the Great Harbor Key Airport in the Berry Islands, which is significantly advanced, and we hope to open this new facility within the next 6 months. The cost of constructing this new airport is approximately $15 million and has been financed exclusively by the taxpayer. However, we intend to transfer these costs over to the PPP facility, thereby creating more headroom for the government to do other projects. The Treasure Key Airport is to be completely rebuilt at a cost of $1.7 million. This new terminal facility will be completely financed by the IDB, who already had a facility in place to do some capital works at this airport. And Mr. Speaker, as previously confirmed, the government of the Bahamas, through the Airport Authority, is on the cusp of acquiring the Grand Bahama International Airport. Mr. Speaker, the Grand Bahama International Airport has been the victim of a number of weather events, which has motivated the current owner, Hutchison Ports, to express a desire to offload this asset. The government will purchase the property for a nominal price and establish a legal construct where they are not obligated to pay any amount to the Port Authority in fees. The government will then hire a consultant to advise it on how best to redevelop that airport, given the high probability of another weather event impacting that airport. Mr. Speaker, it makes no sense to me to build back the same type of airport, i.e. close to the ground, and not at least consider quite seriously the impact of hurricanes and flooding on that facility. It has happened twice in recent memory, some say 3 times, so we must consider how to make that airport more resilient when we contemplate its redevelopment. Upon acquisition, the government of the Bahamas plans to invest approximately $1.5 million in capital improvements to the airport facility in the short term, and then after receiving a report from the consultants on the way forward, enter into a PPP to redevelop this airport. Mr. Speaker, as you can see, we have an ambitious Family Island Airport redevelopment plan. It's taken us some time to get it sorted, but we are now ready to execute a contract with a global firm within the next 30 days to lead the search for the best fit partner for the government of the Bahamas for the continued development and management of the Grand Bahama International Airport and our Family Island Airport. One part of the strategy has already been satisfied, the financing. We're now working on the development and management of these airports. Mr. Speaker, in order to carry out this ambitious Family Island redevelopment plan, the Airport Authority needs, as I previously mentioned, to acquire the land upon which to embark on these projects. The government will utilize its ability to compulsorily acquire the land, understanding that under the terms of such an action, it must compensate the purchasers from whom it is acquiring the land. I note the issues raised by some persons in the commonage in North Eleuthera, and I heard the comments for the member for North Eleuthera yesterday. And the airport authority will seek to determine and digest and accommodate whatever requests it can. Not being a lawyer, Mr. Speaker, and as such, having firmly delegated this issue to the Attorney General's office, I'm sure they will follow the law as it relates to compensation. Within the near term, therefore, Mr. Speaker, I will be tabling, or it has already been tabled, I will be tabling the various resolutions in the House of Assembly to finalize this part of the transaction, the acquiring of the land. The final project that the very busy Aviation Ministry has been rolling out is the implementation of a completely new and modern baggage and passenger screening regime at the Lynden Pending International Airport. Mr. Speaker, when I came to office, there were constant equipment failure as it related to baggage screening at LPA, meaning that passengers were often asked to carry their bag down to the western end of the terminal in our $500 million airport and leave it there as baggage was manually loaded onto the belt to go into the baggage screening equipment. It was a mess. So we decided to, upon the recommendation of the Airport Authority Management, to upgrade the equipment and add an additional baggage screening machine. In addition, we decided to upgrade the passenger screening equipment. So when you next go down to LPIA, you will be greeted and screened by the equipment you typically see in other airports. Hands up, over your head, everything out of your pockets. You all know the time. This equipment is state-of-the-art and put us in good stead with our pre-clearance partners, the TSA, who have been advocating for this equipment for quite some time. The project will cost $10 million and will be paid through airport user fees. The passenger and baggage screening equipment should completely be installed by August or September of this year, and then we will move to the Family Islands to roll out new equipment there also. An RFP has already been issued for this project, and bids are expected within the next 4 weeks. So as you can see, Mr. Speaker, we've been extremely busy. We have an extremely busy Department of Aviation, which is ably led and managed by its director, Mr. Algernon Cargill. They have plenty of projects in motion, and he and his team are doing a fantastic job. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan. We're going to bring the Grand Bahama and a number of Family Island airports into the 21st century, and we're going to invest in their redevelopment. Mr. Speaker, the last topic that I wish to speak on is the Grand Lugayan. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that this project has taken many twists and turns, but I want the people of Grand Bahama to know that myself and the Minister of State for Grand Bahama, the Honorable James Kwesi Thompson, have spent countless hours trying to bring this project to a conclusion. Mr. Speaker, as you can imagine, it has been difficult to get this deal done. Back in March 2020, we had a deal, signed and sealed. And then the pandemic struck, which significantly impacted the lead investors in that project, Royal Caribbean and the ITM Group. Both of those companies are significantly involved in the cruise business, and as we all know, they have been at a dead stop since March of last year. Mr. Speaker, trying to sell a hotel, which was first impacted by one hurricane, then impacted by another hurricane, in the middle of a pandemic, is no easy task. While the journey has been long, and at times very painful, I think we're nearing the end of the journey. The terms have been essentially agreed, and having the sale of the hotel tied to Royal Caribbean and ITM first striking a deal with Hutchison Ports has made this transaction that much more complex. But I think all the ducks have been lined up, and we are nearing completion. I remain hopeful. I have noted with interest the opposition's continued opposition to this project. I remind the people of Grand Bahama that the PLP did not wish for us to buy this hotel. They wanted it to sit, and I guess go the way of that other hotel, which sits abandoned in an eyesore in the downtown Freeport area. But we said, no way, no matter the cost. And it has been costly. We were going to do what we could to save that hotel. And that is exactly what we intend to do. We owe that to the people of Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, I want to end my presentation with an immense thank you to the, I want to end my presentation with an immense thank you to the people of Freetown for allowing me to serve in this place on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, I've represented Freetown for almost 4 years now and have thoroughly enjoyed meeting and fellowshipping with my constituents and trying to the best of my ability to serve their interests in this place. Mr. Speaker, a few condolences. First, I'd like to extend my condolences to the family of Virginia Miller and her mother, Jeanette Thompson, both of whom died recently. They both lived in the Coppet off Wolf Road, and I very much enjoyed their wise advice and the time that we were able to spend together. Second, I'd like to extend my condolences to the family of Rita Thompson of Abraham Street. Rita was a lovely lady, feisty and extremely community-minded. We grew very close in the latter years of her life, and I will sorely miss her constructive feedback and her long chats on the phone. Third, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to extend my condolences to the family of Miss Lovely Rowe of Clark Lane. I'm not sure if she was a supporter of mine, but she was, as her name suggested, a lovely woman who recently invited me into her yard, which is seemingly a gathering point for the community, to partake in a slamming game of dominoes. What fun we all had, and so I was saddened to hear of her loss. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to extend my condolences to the family of Dave Bastian. Dave was a hardcore, die-hard F&M who was extremely supportive and for whom I had the greatest of respect. He was a quiet, decent man who was not afraid of hard work and could always be counted on to deliver on anything he had promised to do. I was shocked to hear of his passing and shall sorely miss his support as we enter this new election cycle. Mr. Speaker, Kemp Road seems to be in the grip of a crime wave with young men being killed with seemingly greater regularity than before. There was recently a murder on Cooper's Terrace, and last week another one on Lion Road. And from what I can tell, these killings are revenge killings, bringing a serious level of concern to the residents of the entire area of the Kemp Road community. I implore the police to deploy additional resources to this area and take whatever steps they can to bring to an end these senseless killings. I know that the Royal Bahamas police force is stretched thin, but whatever can be done to flood the community with a robust police presence so as to deter these killings would be greatly appreciated by the community. Mr. Speaker, the effects of this pandemic on the Freetown community have been devastating. A huge number of my constituents were employed in the tourism sector, from hotel workers, to hair braiders, to cabbage beach vendors, to taxi drivers, to jet ski operators, you name it. They were employed in huge numbers. The impact of this pandemic has been clear for all to see. And as this pandemic drags on, the deeper the effects become. I just want to assure my constituents that as the Minister of Tourism, I'm working as hard as I can to turn this horrible situation around in the quickest possible time. But I see the homelessness. I see the food insecurity. I feel the pain, and that motivates me to work harder to once again create opportunities for my constituents to gain the dignity of a well-paying job. In addition to the economic crisis, we also face a mental health crisis in the Freetown constituency. As the pandemic continues to negatively impact the daily lives of Freetown constituents, I've noted and been advised of an increase in drug and alcohol addiction, gambling addiction, depression, anxiety, and domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, the nonprofit and mental health organizations that assist Freetown constituents dealing with mental health issues, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and People Helping People, are crying for an easing of the restrictions to allow them to meet and to go to work assisting persons. I shall do my endeavor best to help those organizations to get back into the business of saving people's lives. Freetown has its fair share of infrastructure concerns, which I'm attempting to address. Hillside Street needs to be paved, and I've been assured that the Ministry of Works is working on that now. Not sure what happened to the Village Road project, repaving project, but I'm sure financial constraints have deferred that project into next year's budget. Streetlights are a major concern, and given the financial constraints that BPL has in solving this problem, I'm going to use an approved private contractor to get as many of those lights on as possible. Obviously, if it is just a bulb issue, the private contractor can do that. The BPL will need to deal with the more complex electrical problems and the vines and trees that have grown up and around a number of the streetlights. Mr. Speaker, the long-awaited reconstruction of the Anstown Clinic is finally underway. The community of Kemp Road has long advocated for its redevelopment, and so I'm glad to see it finally happening. Mr. Speaker, I'm also excited about the construction of a Kemp Road Community Center on Williams Lane, right next to the Anstown Clinic, via the Citizen Security and Justice Program of the Ministry of National Security. While undoubtedly there have been delays in the project due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm assured that its construction is about to begin. Mr. Speaker, I've supported the 2 public schools in my constituency from day one since I was elected. The schools are the Sister Annie B. Thompson Government Preschool and the Uriah McPhee Primary School. I'd like to thank all of the Ministry of Education staff and teachers as they continue to educate hundreds of students in the Freetown constituency. I'm aware of the various maintenance issues by Uriah McPhee, typically air conditioning, and I'm in constant communication with the Minister of Education to bring resolution to these issues. Mr. Speaker, my constituents are asking the Parliamentary Registration Department to make available a registration center closer to the Freetown constituency to facilitate the registration of more constituents from Freetown. Now, Mr. Speaker, I encourage all Freetown constituents eligible to vote to register and prepare to exercise their democratic to vote in the next general election. I do hope you vote for me, though. I call on the Parliamentary Registration Department to consider opening a registration center, even if only for a few days, either at the Shirley Street Post Office or at the Kemp Road Community Library by Uriah McPhee Primary School. And finally, Mr. Speaker, there are too many derelict buildings in my constituency. One particular property which needs to be addressed by the Department of Environmental Health, the AG's office, Ministry of Public Works, is the old Marriottas Hotel in Okra Hill. This property is a hazard. There have been numerous fires that have impacted the residents in that area. And there are hordes of rats. The building is basically an illegal dump site. Mr. Speaker, I'm calling on the Minister of the Environment, the AG, the Minister of Works to work their magic and remove this eyesore from my community. Mr. Speaker, this ends my presentation. Once again, I thank the good people of Freetown for their continued support. I look forward to interacting and fellowshipping with them on the campaign trail. And may God continue to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Freetown supports its midterm budget and the 2010 Fiscal Strategy Report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Sanderville.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, just for a point of clarification, I know the minister would have spoken to $150 million or more going through the PPP through the Airport Authority. Can you advise us as to when you will submit or lay the audited financial statements of the Airport Authority, please? Thank you.
Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Freetown.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the good member from Centerville. He always keeps us abiding by the rules. I will seek to, I'm sure the financial statements are done. It's just a function of laying them. So I will seek to bring them forward. And in the meantime, I will send them to you so that when I do bring them forward, you have something to say about them when they reach. Thank you for that comment, and I'm happy to oblige. Are you on the audits committee? Oh.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many? Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to have this opportunity to represent the people of Marco City in this place and to present on this mid-year budget. Mr. Speaker, prior to the break, which is for approximately 28 minutes, I'll begin the discussion with respect to my portfolio as Minister of Agriculture and Marine Resources, and after the break, to present on my stewardship in Marco City and to paint the picture of the work that we have ahead of us in the constituency. Mr. Speaker, several months ago during the budget debate, we forecasted a series of actions we intended to take to address the emergency food plan and the potential concerns about food insecurity. Mr. Speaker, we have been faithful in following those initiatives that we forecasted. And today I seek to give an account of a number of the steps taken and to say to the population, we have moved the needle forward in several significant areas. The portfolio that I presently oversee provides me with responsibility for the Department of Marine Resources, the Department of Agriculture, the Cooperative Department, BAMSI, BAIC, and the Bahamas Agricultural Health and Food Safety Authority. And of course, Mr. Speaker, the department that has been enjoyed by successive administrations, this being no different, the department responsible for regattas. Mr. Speaker, we also have the good fortune of managing a substantial inventory of land that is divided between BAIC and, of course, the Department of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Agriculture has in many ways been brought to the forefront in the midst of this pandemic. We experienced, Mr. Speaker, substantial challenges as a result of Dorian. Two of the three economic centers in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas were taken offline as a result of a Category 5 hurricane that devastated Abaco and Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, as we sought to recover from the ravages of Dorian and the fact that several of our most notable agricultural operations being destroyed, we were immediately faced with a pandemic that in many ways eclipsed the impact of Dorian, not just on Grand Bahama and Abaco, but on the entire Commonwealth. The question that has been raised, Mr. Speaker, is how have we responded as an administration? This administration, Mr. Speaker, recognized immediately that farmers and fishers are essential workers and ought to be given the requisite protection in the midst of this pandemic. They could continue to execute their job. And while this was not without challenges, I wish to thank my colleagues, in particular, the Prime Minister and the Minister with responsibility for national security, who consistently enable farmers and fishers to do their work. While we had challenges with respect to ensuring that the fish markets consistently operated, the farmers' markets remained open on a consistent basis, and we worked out additional protocols that enabled fishers to continue to share and to sell their wares. Both daytime fishers as well as commercial fishers were able to consistently go out and continue to support the marine product supply chain. And farmers, their fares were allayed. Those who for a moment thought that they may not have an opportunity to care for their crops as well as to tend to their animals, they were given a pass to ensure that they can consistently contribute to food security in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, during the pandemic, we clearly recognized that there was a need for additional support for several subsectors in agriculture and marine resources. And during this presentation, I will in detail outline the support that we gave. I wish, Mr. Speaker, to point out, first of all, the approach that we took post-Dorian and, of course, in the midst of the pandemic to consistently keep members of the opposition and independents up to date on the different initiatives that we've been pursuing. Mr. Speaker, our attempt to be bipartisan in all that we do is simply because we hold the view that the tribalism that has existed and continue to exist in Bahamian politics have not served the country well, and that in the unlikely event that there's a change in government, it is important that there's minimal disruption in the various ministries that have the potential to set our country back and to set those individual ministries back. The opposition and members, the independents, have been helpful in the information that they have shared and have helped to guide, and we pivoted where we believe we got constructive criticism. Mr. Deputy, opposite, that bipartisanship has not at all been helpful on a personal note, given the strategy that you all have decided to employ to target me on a consistent basis.
You don't know nothing about that.
But
He in the front room, he in the back room, he in the dark room, whatever they call it.
But Mr. Deputy, Mr. Deputy, 1 year from now, as I am right now, I'll still be standing. And Mr. Deputy, I don't count you in that, by the way. But Mr. Deputy, I find that it is so important to speak directly, Exoma, to speak directly to persons' face and to be candid in my assessment of them, as opposed to, as some are given to, approaching from the rear with unnecessary and false attacks. But Exuma, we will deal with that at another time. We remain committed. We remain committed to keeping the members of the opposition and independents informed about the work that we have been assigned, and to also keep members of the public aware. We have had an unprecedented number of public meetings, small meetings in person, obeying the protocol set out by the Ministry of Health, as well as virtual meetings with farmers, with fishers, persons in the handicraft industry throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, to hear their views, and more importantly, over this last 6 months, to pivot where they have suggested we can better serve them. Mr. Speaker, we have determined that it is absolutely important for us to make radical adjustments in agriculture. The Minister of Tourism has rightly said that for the foreseeable future, tourism and financial services will continue to be the twin engines that drive economic development in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and we believe that. However, there is a need for policymakers on both sides of the divide to make a fundamental structural adjustment in the way the economy is built and it functions, to ensure that diversification is not paid lip service. I believe that we are on that path in this administration to ensure that there is not only diversification in the national economy, but that in individual ministries like the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources, there is diversification within individual ministries. Mr. Speaker, diversification is clearly facilitated when additional resources are allocated to ministries historically starved for oxygen and for resources. But a clear signal of a government's commitment to diversifying the economy is to put in place transformative policy decisions. And this administration, Mr. Speaker, has done so. One such key policy decision has been the requirement that all heads of agreement written in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas mandate that hotels, restaurants, food stores, and others that are sourcing food for sale to tourists in the Bahamas and Bahamians, 40% of all that is sourced must be sourced from Bahamian producers. And that the government, if it is to have the moral authority to enforce such a requirement, then 75 cents of every dollar spent on food, whether it's by the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, the big three that source food items, they must then spend that money with Bahamian producers. Mr. Speaker, this single initiative, policy decision by the government has sent the correct signals to the market, and a number of the applicants for farmers permit agri-business persons who have begun to invest in the sector have identified this policy decision as the primary reason why they thought to take this sector seriously. Historically, persons who have been interested, for example, in the poultry business have shied away because they believe that profitability could be achieved if, at a minimum, they had a 35% protection in terms of ensuring that the food stores, the restaurants, the wholesalers, the hotels would buy from what they produce. The government upped them 5%, and this is just the beginning. A second policy decision that came from this administration is to give permission to the ministry to work with public-private partnerships in several key areas. One, the privatization of the feed mill. We've had great regret, Mr. Speaker, that successive administrations have not been able to serve livestock farmers with the efficiency and effectiveness required to grow the livestock industry. In fact, in terms of poultry and in terms of eggs, we have gone backwards over the years. Mr. Speaker, however, we have an opportunity to do something very different going forward. And the policy decision taken by the government was simply this. One, through our emergency food plan, we were going to augment the money spent by farmers in providing them with layer birds that would increase the number of layer hens that are available in order to grow the egg production business, which, as a result of studies we have had conducted along with the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, clearly show that we can be self-sufficient in egg production over the course of the next 3 years. So the government's policy decision to encourage the privatization of the feed mill recognize that feed being 50% oftentimes of the cost for setting up poultry operation, whether it's meat or whether it's for egg, that we would enhance the livestock business in general, poultry business in particular, if we were to support Bahamians who are in the private sector with more capital, with much more capital than the government and expertise in running an efficient, effective, world-class feed mill. And I'm grateful to my colleagues for not just talking about privatization and the empowerment of Bahamians, but making it possible through endorsing our approach to PPPs. The second policy decision, under the same banner of PPPs, the Cabinet has recently agreed that all packing houses throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the produce exchange on Portuguese, which must be transformed, will now be available for producer organizations, preferably farmer producer organizations, to acquire the individual packing houses or all of the packing houses in order to use them as distribution centers, centers whereby they may process vegetables, fruits for a number of the value-added products that we are presently importing. And Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet of the Bahamas is also looking favorably at us making sure that the abattoir and slaughterhouse facilities are constructed throughout the Bahamas, and that they are run by private agribusiness investors. Mr. Speaker, this is a fundamental shift in the agriculture model in the country. And these policy signals that have been sent, while they do not titillate the WhatsApp being circulated and don't titillate the Facebook posts that are out there, sorry, to excite those who love to read. Mr. Speaker, the single decision to endorse the ministry's desire to privatize these entities, not just to create employment, but to create wealth for Bahamians, is a fundamental shift, and we believe will pay huge dividends for Bahamians. We encourage farmers to organize yourselves in producer organizations to access the capital that is already available in this market in order to acquire and successfully run these assets. Remember, if we're going to have a thriving agriculture sector, it is absolutely important to have a robust distribution center. And that whole distribution ecosystem can in fact be augmented, supported by the acquisition of these packing houses throughout the Bahamas and the produce exchange located at Pulaski. If we're to have a vibrant livestock sector, there is a need for us to have a slaughterhouse, a national slaughterhouse system. And again, the cabinet has paved the way for that to happen. BASFA will play an important role. The Bahamas Agriculture, Health and Food Safety Authority, under the able leadership of the member for Fort Charlotte, will be overseeing the national slaughterhouse system by providing world-class veterinarians, Bahamas born and bred, who will oversee this development. So I've mentioned two major policy decisions, one on the PPPs, a second guaranteeing that Bahamian producers will have market access, a third policy decision that this government has made over the last several months is to support our request to develop an ecosystem and infrastructure for the production of value-added goods. And so we are excited by the government having given us permission. So for all of the persons out there who are producing value-added goods, you will now be in a position over the course of the next 6 months and the following year to get concrete support from the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources to help you source a number of the ingredients required for your value-added goods, containers, jars, etc., required for the packaging. And we will continue the work that we've started with you in making sure that your capacity is built through good manufacturing practices. And if you are producing the items you then process, good agriculture practices as well. We have been holding a number of courses along with the Commonwealth of Learning out of Canada for the GAP courses, Good Agriculture Practices. We've been working with the Volcani International Partnerships and the Israeli Coalition with the Caribbean, with Dr. Thomas and the group of farmers here in the Bahamas to ensure that we offer courses in precision and smart agriculture, but also to look at the value of food processing. And so the policy decision of the cabinet to support the development of an ecosystem and infrastructure for value-added goods, we believe is going to pay dividends. We are presently spending $400 million in value-added goods in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, we're spending an additional $650 million on fruits, vegetables, proteins such as pork, beef, small ruminants, or the more accessible term would be sheep and goats, and of course poultry, both eggs and meat. Imagine that. $650 million on fruits, vegetables, flowers, and of course, livestock, $400 million on value-added goods. Mr. Speaker, we have an opportunity to create tremendous wealth in the Bahamas if we were to simply produce much of what we are presently importing. And over the last 6 months, we have taken the allocation made available through the Ministry of Finance to begin to eat away at that food import bill. We've worked with the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, with IECA, which is the agriculture arm of the Organization of American States. That's all the Latin American countries, Caribbean countries, along with the US and Canada, with CARDI, which is the Agricultural Research and Development arm of CARICOM. And we've conducted a number of important studies. One of the studies recently completed on boutique agriculture revealed that there are some 77 items that Bahamians can in fact produce at world-class standard. And as long as we are doing so at a price point that makes sense to our food stores, restaurants, and wholesalers, that we can carve out $200 million that we are presently spending around the world to import items that we have the ability to produce ourselves. And so, Mr. Speaker, I say to all of the investors that are out there, young Bahamians who are looking for an opportunity to empower their families, look at agriculture and marine resources afresh. It does not make sense to go to one of our food stores and see filet snappers, filet salmon, crab legs, a whole variety of marine products that are imported from elsewhere when our water is teeming with the same produce. And so we are working diligently with the Minister of Tourism, with Ms. Janet Johnson, an initiative led by the member for Fort Charlotte, to ensure that the companies that are presently importing those items that we have in the Bahamas, they will now shift to import those items, to buy those items from Bahamian producers. Mr. Speaker, you will see this year stores that are selling snappers will only be able to sell foreign snappers after they have exhausted purchasing snappers from Bahamian fishers. This is also true for livestock. There's a small livestock industry in the Bahamas. It makes no sense that the poultry being produced locally should not be bought in its entirety before persons being allowed to import those items. Mr. Speaker, we do not believe that we need to use the authority we have to restrict the import of any item. All of our discussions with the wholesalers and food stores and hoteliers thus far have been very fruitful. And so we expect that they will be supportive, as they have indicated they will be, of Bahamian producers. Mr. Speaker, in fact, to give concrete example, we have been in discussions right up to yesterday, had a wonderful chat with one of the leaders at Atlantis. Atlantis has gone as far as to provide us with the top 25 items that they purchase. We have a good sense of the quantities that they order, the intervals at which they order, the revenue or the expenditure that they spend, and they are prepared to enter into contractual arrangements with Bahamian farmers in order to supply those items for the hotel. We are now in the advanced stage of closing that arrangement. In fact, they have gone even further to indicate they are prepared to make available some of the acreage that they have in order to facilitate this arrangement that we're working on. We have had similar fruitful conversations with Albany, with Bahama, and several other hotels in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And the food stores have also attended those meetings. and they have, in fact, been generous in their advice and their commitment to work with Bahamian farmers. But I want to say to all of the Bahamian producers, we can only be effective in making sure that this arrangement works if you make us aware of the items that you're producing, the quantities, the varieties, the intervals that you are harvesting those items. We have, through BAIC, through the Department of Policy and Planning, been reaching out to farmers throughout the Commonwealth to ensure that we have all of your information in our database. We want our farmers, our fishers, to be far more vigilant in getting us the information. We can only act on the basis of what we know. And as much as the hotels, the restaurants, the food stores, and others have indicated they're prepared to support Bahamian producers, I do not believe that nationalism alone is going to be sufficient for them to maintain their commitment. They want to ensure that the supply chain that they have that provides for their customers, that is not disrupted. And if we are not able or not willing to consistently supply the fruits, the vegetables, the flowers, the protein, the marine products, they will then resume pressing that one button to their broker, to the person who handles distribution, to order the 500 items from overseas. We believe that that should not happen. And so we wish for you to be responsive to the surveys we've sent out, to the request for information, to make sure when they indicate, that is the buyers, that they want X amount of tomatoes, bell peppers, snappers, lobster, crab legs, etc., that we are in a position to provide. And so we are excited, Mr. Speaker, that the relationships that we've established with the multilateral organizations that I've identified, those relationships have put us in a good position where we now have access to empirical data that enables us to make evidence-based decisions, so that we no longer operate on the basis of conjecture or speculation, but we know the kinds of decisions the government must make in terms of legislation, policies, programs, and projects in order to move more aggressively towards food security and food sovereignty. Mr. Speaker, I began this presentation talking about the correct policy decisions made by this administration and how it is moving this sector along. Another important decision made by this administration is to support the development of a national laboratory system. Mr. Speaker, if we are to succeed in agricultural development and to protect the health and safety of Bahamians, we must be in a position to carefully test flora and fauna, plants and animals produced here in the Bahamas, whether it is for consumption or for other purposes. We must also carefully evaluate, Mr. Speaker, those animals and plants as well as food items that are crossing the border to come to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Again, this function in the ministry is overseen by the Bahamas Agricultural Health and Food Safety Authority. But what we also know, Mr. Speaker, is that it is absolutely important for the Department of Marine Resources and for the Department of Agriculture to be in a position to commission studies on various fruits, vegetables, livestock, marine products that we are exporting to the global community or accepting into the Bahamas. We also know that the University of the Bahamas also has a number of important initiatives that require a robust laboratory system. And so as a result, we thought it was absolutely important to work with all stakeholders that require testing. And in the event, just by the way, Mr. Speaker, in the event that medicinal marijuana is legalized in the Bahamas, there will be a need for a robust system of laboratories in order to assist with branding the various products that may come out of different family islands. And so a national laboratory system is essential. And I'm grateful to my colleagues for seeing the wisdom in us giving the green light to proceed in that direction. Already, we have attracted resources internationally, and we believe that more resources are available for us to build out not just the primary laboratories for testing, but all of the redundancies, all of the additional laboratories that will be a double check on the results from the initial laboratories. Again, Mr. Speaker, this policy decision isn't one that trends on Facebook or on WhatsApp, but what it does do is it moves us in the right direction to transform the agriculture and marine resources sector. Recently, Mr. Speaker, we had a very uninformed presenter visited Grand Bahama, talking a great deal about what the position of the Ministry of Agriculture is on food imports. Clearly uninformed or deliberately intellectually dishonest when he contended that the ministry is committed to supporting the merchant class and not growing the agriculture sector so that the average Bahamian could be empowered. Nothing could be further from the truth, Mr. Speaker. First of all, it was an absolute lie to suggest that the government of the Bahamas, present or past, would permit food items to come into our food store that is knowingly carcinogenic and can harm the lives of Bahamians. Totally irresponsible and an absolute blatant lie. In fact, Mr. Speaker, BASFA has recently conducted a study of rice that is that's being imported for sale in the food store. And where example of high levels of harmful elements are found in any product, BASFA provides advice and we move quickly to ensure that that brand is no longer permitted in the Bahamas. We've been active in terms of recalls, consistent with calls by manufacturer to have certain products that they have removed from the shelves. We have moved very swiftly once we become aware of something that's potentially harmful, and we've had it withdrawn from the food stores. I don't believe any administration that's ever occupied power in this country will permit items knowingly to come across the border in the Bahamas and that will be harmful to the Bahamian people. I can certainly vouch for this administration that in every case we became aware of any food item that is potentially problematic, we have acted, and we have acted quickly and decisively. Mr. Speaker, another false claim made, I just referenced, is that we're interested in continuing to be importers. No, we are interested in being producers. That's precisely why we have guaranteed 40% of the market for private companies wishing to sell food items. That's why we have guaranteed that 75 cents of every dollar spent by government will be spent with Bahamian producers on food items. We are not committed to ensuring that the status quo as it exists will continue in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, another policy decision taken by this administration that we believe is extremely important in the development of agriculture is to ensure that we provide additional resources to the agriculture and fisheries sector. Our former Minister of Finance, the Honorable Peter Turnquest, was adamant that we provide the largest possible allocation to small and medium-sized business development. Hence, the government committed to at least $50 million being provided to small business development. And much of that is available to farmers and fishers through a loan facility. However, $5 million was earmarked for grant funding. Some people call it free money. $5 million, colleagues, available for persons who had viable business projects or whose initiatives were damaged because of some calamity now have access to resources that can help them jumpstart or grow their enterprises. We have, the ministry that is, worked very closely with the Small Business Development Center that is doing a tremendous job in ensuring that we empower Bahamians. It's one thing to have an amazing idea. It's another thing to be able to fund the idea so that you can realize your dreams. And so we are grateful to the additional allocation of resources. But what has been the beauty of SBDC, the Ministry of Finance, the Venture Capital Fund, the Bahamas Development Bank, what has been beautiful about the signal that they have sent to farmers, to light manufacturers, to fishers, is that now, and I can't say for the first time, but I can tell you, the largest amount of money in the private sector appears to be finding its way into the agriculture sector because the ministry is sending the right signal to the private sector. Mr. Speaker, just yesterday, we had the good fortune of sitting down with Bahamian agribusiness persons and venture capitalists who was interested in pumping millions of dollars into the agriculture sector to support potential businesses that are struggling financially and simply need access to resources. So this is money that would ordinarily have been invested in some other area in our national economy. However, because of the kinds of policy decisions made by this administration, there is a growing interest in the agriculture and marine resources sector because we are sending the correct signals that we are not merely paying lip service to the importance of agriculture and marine resources in food security. Mr. Speaker, we have had an increase in terms of persons who have been applying for farmers' permit and for those who have been applying for land. And the striking thing about these applications is that the overwhelming majority of persons now applying are young persons under the age of 45. And a significant portion of that group is under the age of 35. Mr. Speaker, this is important because the Bahamian farmer, on average, is 65 years or older. The vast majority of Bahamian farmers historically. But today, young Bahamians are flocking to agriculture because of the ongoing discussion and opportunities about precision agriculture, smart agriculture, climate smart agriculture, and those sexy subsectors such as hydroponics, aquaponics, using new technologies to grow more with a smaller footprint. So, Mr. Speaker, we are encouraged. We believe that the future of agriculture in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is going to be in wonderful hands. We are finding that any number of young professionals in the agriculture sector are returning home, and they're not asking for a space, they are carving out their space. And whether the government is ready or not, they are taking on the issue of food security and food sovereignty. Mr. Speaker, another important policy decision by this administration has been to liberalize the lease of lands. Mr. Speaker, I've been on record for years as saying the leasing of lands really ought to be a function that a group in government who is properly monitored should be able to carry out so that policymakers are not bogged down in this on an ongoing basis and are not tempted to do the political thing, which is to advantage a small group, and given what is happening in the country, a certain color group in the allocation of land. We've been fortunate, Mr. Speaker, in the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources to have gotten the support of cabinet colleagues to now resume the leasing of land to Bahamians of all colors, Mr. Speaker. Independent, those that support the opposition, those that support government, as long as they have a viable project and they're prepared to put the land to use for what they claim they intended to use it for. I must pause at this point to say, Mr. Speaker, we have the unfortunate situation, so many persons having gotten crown land, lease land, and instead of using it for fruit and vegetable production or flowers or livestock or aquaculture, they have used it for roadside garages, apartments, houses which they seek to will on government land to the next generation. And because of our own negligence in government, some of them are on to their third generation of willing what they cannot will. Some have built churches, and that must be a difficult sermon to preach in a place where you know that the purpose for which the property was acquired is not consistent with what is being done. And the truth is, because we need God in so many respects, both governments would be minded to provide land for church facility in the correct location. And so we wish to discourage those that are breaking away from other churches to form churches on land where it's not designed that you ought to stay in the spirit. Mr. Speaker, we also have in the Cowpen Road, Carmichael Road area, Gladstone Road area, Bahamians who are excavating government land, selling fill, soil. I'm not sure if they're finding any other minerals, but they're selling government land to a wide variety of sources and have no legal basis for being on the land. It is illegal, and no amount of protest will cause us to stop from seeking to have you evicted of those particular properties. It is illegal, it is harmful to what we are seeking to do in those areas. We've sent letters to a number of the persons, and we have been surprised at who the owners are of the heavy equipment and trucks that are in fact doing this. We have not sought to name and shame. I think Minister Wells and myself in the Ministry of Agriculture, we have been very disciplined in trying to do the work without creating any rancor. But we are asking you, all of you, you know exactly who you are. We're asking you to cease and desist. Again, Mr. Deputy, so that you could, opposite Exoma, so you could share with others. We've gone into ministries and we've gone about our business, trying to do what the public has elected us to do, which is to work on food security, food sovereignty. We haven't engaged in the I gotcha moments, even though we got audited reports. We've just sought to go about doing our business, and we think it's always helpful to do it that way. We've seen some questions raised in the social media that obviously beg us to maybe rethink that strategy. I think it is a good strategy.
You got to fight fire with fire.
No, I think it's a good strategy. I think we stay focused. We focus on the people's business. But it is unfortunate that persons who are armed with the information, who know what the facts are, would play mischief when I thought we were in the serious business of growing the agriculture and marine resources
Come to your meeting and
sector.
then stab you. They come to your meeting and then stab you.
Mr. Speaker, these policy decisions
Shame.
these policy decisions that have been made by this administration, we believe have moved us in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to now pivot to the legislative decisions that we have made that we believe is moving us in the right direction. You would have heard, Mr. Speaker, the series of landmark legislation outlined by the Minister with responsibility for the environment and housing, the Honorable Romal Ferreira. Mr. Speaker, I believe that ministry, in tandem with the stakeholders that work with it, have done an incredible job in ensuring the safety and protection of our environment. We are sending the right message, not just to the domestic market, but to the international community, that we welcome you in the Bahamas. We enjoy the historical partnership we have shared with you, but we are not prepared to compromise future generations for the sake of the dollar that you are spending today. This is no more important a point than to be made when discussing the cruise industry. We value you. We appreciate the historical relationship, but we are deeply concerned about the practices that some cruise ships have engaged in. Presently, the government is looking at the home porting project as mentioned by Dionisio de Aguilar, the member for Freetown, and we welcome it. But we are mindful of those vessels that have sheltered in place in Bahamian waters, who've dropped their anchors, who've damaged our seabed, that it is important that you appreciate the relationship as we appreciate the relationship. We have a country that both in tourism as well as in marine resources depend on these seabeds and the assets that are there. And we expect guests in the Bahamas to behave in a certain way, to acknowledge when mistakes are made, and more importantly, through financial means, they ought to remediate any damages that are done. Mr. Speaker, as we go to lunch, I just wish to close where I began. We have a marvelous opportunity to grow the agriculture and marine resources sector. It has to be a bipartisan approach. I can't imagine any serious activist, any serious independent in the House of Assembly, any serious member of the opposition, any serious member of the government working cross-purpose on matters that require bipartisan approach in order for us to save this country. We are in a crisis, and the crisis require us to work together. So where persons are sharing falsehood around health-related issues, an area that previously in the Bahamas, both governments had agreed that they would find a way to work together. When persons are sharing false information around health, we cannot be serious about getting out of this crisis. Where persons are sharing false information around national security, we can't be serious about getting out of this crisis. And so, Mr. Speaker, as we go to the break, I'd like to encourage all concerned. Let's try to be intellectually honest. There are enough issues for us to compete for the next election cycle, as opposed to us becoming fabricators, not of any items that we are presently importing, but fabricators of information. And Mr. Speaker, I pray long and hard to be measured in what I say, but I'll have other opportunities to speak. But some of the people who are least qualified, Mr. Speaker, least qualified to make certain assertions are the main persons. I want to give some modicum of respect to them that you know, who are least qualified to make certain assertions are the ones who are the chief fabricators.
They think you don't know something.
And so, Mr. Speaker, I believe it's important for us to work in tandem with each other. The country is in crisis. Every member of parliament in this place today, I don't agree with the brother from Centerville who said his constituents are making 83 cents and we making 70s. I just don't know where that figure came from. But I would say every member of parliament in this place, I believe, could pay their light bill, could pay their water bill, could pay their mortgage, and there are a couple who still paying rent, could pay their rent. But Mr. Speaker, the people out there need us to be in a position to help them and to dumb down information, to deceive the people who you wish to lead is inappropriate. No matter who's doing it, it's bad. To seek to raise the misery index as the means of making myself more attractive is a lack of vision and an inability to share a vision that people will be attached to. So, Mr. Speaker, folks who come to Grand Bahama, because, you know, you do some things in Nassau, my colleagues said, who come to Grand Bahama to talk about a level of misery that when they were in place, they did not address. is to seek to be deceptive. And I want to say as clear as possible. One good way to judge whether people can nationally manage the economy and the redemption of the Bahamian people is to examine what have they done with the little they have been responsible for. If they ran a ministry in the past, how effective was that ministry? If they have a constituency, has there been fundamental transformation in that constituency? Because an ineffective member of parliament on the local level certainly can't change your condition on a national level. An ineffective minister, in my estimation, will be found wanting if they're in charge of all ministries. I stop there, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Speaker, I was about to ask that the business of this House go beyond the 1 o'clock hour. But since the member yield, I move that the business of this House suspend for lunch and that we return today at 3 p.m.
Thank you, honorable. Honorable member for Marco City. If you note the clock, you still have 8:26 on your first hour.
Yes.
So when we return, you would have that added to your time. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House suspends until the 3 p.m. hour. As many members that are in favor will remain seated, those who oppose would stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
Right.